Hello, and welcome to the show. I'm Mike Leiderman. If there is anyone who should know what's going on in terms of the military, political, and social climate of Israel today, he is our guest, Hirsh Goodman. Hirsh Goodman is the defense correspondent for the Jerusalem Post, a newspaper he has worked for since 1969. He's considered one of the world's foremost military journalists. He is also writing on the political issues as well. He's also a novelist. And in addition to his day job at the Post, if you will, he's a regular contributor to magazines such as The New Republic, The Atlantic Monthly, and is a consultant for CBS News. He's also a scholar, lecturer, and a fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. And I'm glad that you could join us today, Hirsh.
Thanks.
Traveling all the way from Israel by way of a tour of the United States. We've been hearing so much lately about Israel's precarious position in the world. That's different from what we've always heard. Israel has become, in the minds of the general public, or many in the general public, the Goliath rather than the David ever since the Lebanon invasion. It's become the oppressor rather than the oppressed to the minds of some people. You're there, you cover. What is your feeling about this kind of new image of military juggernaut that Israel is projecting?
Well, it's amazing how journalism tends to work in cliches, you know. I think what sparked it all off was 20 years of the Six-Day War. It was an anniversary, newspapers had to produce articles, journalists had to produce the pieces, 20 years of occupation or liberation of the West Bank, and so on and so forth. But as I said earlier, just the other day when I was speaking to an audience, I said, I've lived in Washington now for 3 months. If the only thing I knew about Israel was from what I read in the Washington Post, I'd have an absolutely, totally distorted picture of the country. It reminds me of seeing a Russian documentary on life in America, not so long ago, that they aired in Moscow, before Glasnost. This country was homeless, sleeping on the pavements, drunk, drug addicts. There were no country clubs, there was no education, there was no culture, and it's a very, I feel exactly the same way about the Washington Post and a lot of the media here. And I'll tell you something else, if I may just, I watched an NBC show on the West Bank the other night. I switched it off after 3 minutes.
Well, let's talk about a few of these things. You talk about a Russian interpretation of American life as an example of exaggeration. Here we're talking about some of the most respected journalistic entities, let's say NBC News or the Washington Post.
Respected by whom? Just because it's the Washington Post, is it automatically respected? Is everything that Nora Basuni files from Lebanon automatically respected because it's in the Washington Post? I think not. I think that that's nonsense.
Well, let's take an example. There was a recent run of articles and TV programs on the issue of the Palestinians on the West Bank, who have known literally for a generation nothing but Israeli occupation, looking upon these people not as so much a fifth column of terrorists, but as a people oppressed by a bureaucracy with military overtones, meaning Israel's relationship with the Palestinians. And this documentary showed harassment of the population. It showed Israeli soldiers responding to charges of brutality in the prisons. It showed things that we have seen in this country that we turn green over, harassment, belittling, unreasonable search and seizure.
It also shows a lot of creative editing. Look, I don't want to become a...
You're saying this is not true?
No, what I'm saying it is that there are many levels to the truth, okay? And I find here truth has to be expressed in headlines. There's no nuance. There's no texture. There's no fiber. It's just cliches and headlines. And I'm saying that that's not truth. No. It's true that I, in my newspaper, have written for years against any concept of Israel trying to retain the West Bank and Gaza. I don't believe that we can. I don't think that Israel can enforce itself on those people. I don't think you can get people to love you by military occupation. The lessons of Lebanon were absolutely clear to me. I wrote against the war in Lebanon all the time. But let's look at it objectively for a moment. When has the West Bank not been occupied? There were Mamelukes, there were Turks, there were Crusaders, there were British, there were French. Now the Israelis. It's always been occupied. It's never been an independent country.
But here's the
These
situation.
people have always been oppressed. Now, my problem is I have to resolve it. All I've got to bargain with is territory. That's all I've got to bargain with. Which Palestinian has ever stepped forward and said, okay, let's talk? Where are they? Who am I supposed to speak to? Who? And the only thing that Yasser Arafat's done in 20 years of Israeli occupation, the only achievement that Arafat's done for his people are 60,000 Jews living in the West Bank and Gaza that I am against. I don't think we should be living there.
In other words, he has developed.
Where's the Palestinian leadership?
Yeah.
Where are the things on the table that they said, well, let's discuss this, and we said no? Name one thing.
So you're characterizing the West Bank settlers as extremists on the Israelis?
Yeah, when this guy Brokaw goes along and he speaks to Meir Kahane on the one side and Palestinians on the other side, and there's nothing in between in Israel? 16 political parties sit in that Knesset. You can stand up in the Israeli parliament today and say, I think you should get out of the West Bank, or I think I should annex the West Bank. It's a free and open democracy, and those are the two poles that he finds. Palestinians getting beaten and Kahane, or where they do a cut on television. You're a television person, okay? Let's imagine the following picture. A long line of Palestinian women waiting at one tap with jugs on their head to get water, and the cut is to a kid jumping into a swimming pool on an Israeli settlement. It's there, you saw it with your eyes, but that's a distortion of the truth.
When you talk
Why is there only one tap there? The tap is there because the PLO will not allow those people to take Israeli aid, okay? It will not allow Jordan to invest in the refugee camps because the PLO wants to keep the refugee problem alive as a festering wound so that their issue will not go under. I understand their point of view. It's just like the ANC in South Africa wants anarchy.
So once these people are basically chips for both sides, for the Israeli side, for the PLO
These
side.
poor Palestinians are caught between the hammer and the anvil. The hammer of Israeli occupation and the anvil of the Palestinian inability to sit and discuss their future. Sadat came to Jerusalem. The Camp David Accords were signed by Menachem Begin. The Camp David Accords that was signed by Menachem Begin and commit Israel to this day say, we totally recognize the legitimate rights of the Palestinian people. Within 2 years, there'll be full autonomy on the West Bank and in Gaza, and within 5 years, they'll rediscuss the status of that territory. If the Palestinians would have come to the Camp David table, with Sadat today, they would have had some form of independent state. Instead, they said no.
As a reporter, where do you see this whole issue going? You see
Well, I see it very simply.
the West Bank issue.
Yeah, I see it very simply. You've got a whole generation of Palestinian kids who've grown up with nothing but occupation. At the same time, their educational levels have soared. The illiteracy of the youth on the West Bank is exactly 4% of the illiteracy of their parents. It's amazing. We've wiped away illiteracy in one generation. But that combination of occupation plus education is a surefire recipe for nationalism. Conversely, in Israel, I've got a whole generation of 20-year-olds who know nothing else but that the West Bank is part of Israel. To them, the green line, the 67 border, is a totally esoteric concept. And therefore, I've got the development of two poles. And this here is the last generation that can sit down and discuss it and resolve it. Now, the international conference that people were speaking about has died. The idea seems to have just dissipated into nothingness. The Camp David Accords that gave everybody so much hope have dissipated into nothingness. On the positive side of the coin, I see a new young generation of 40-year-old leadership in the West Bank who are saying, you know what? We're sick and tired of waking up every morning and finding another Jewish road and another Jewish settlement here. We're going to have to live with these guys. And we want to live with these guys. The West Bank has got no ports. It's got no industrial infrastructure. It's got no airports.
It also doesn't have the same human rights that Arabs have in other parts of Israel.
No, it doesn't. And that's the argument of the left. The argument of the right in Israel is, let's extend Israeli law to the West Bank. Give them access to our courts. Make them Israeli citizens. That's what the right wing of Israel wants to do. It wants to annex the West Bank. You annex it by extending law, Israeli law, to the West Bank. The left wing in Israel says no, do not change the status quo. Leave this as an occupied territory run by the military, so it's negotiable.
And what you're having, though, if you, as it remains a negotiable item run by the military, you're getting a military bureaucracy where people are in a festering state that has only got to lead to a powder
Well,
keg.
there's a lot that you can do.
All right, let's give you a lot of authority now.
Fine. First of all, there are hundreds of Palestinian engineers, architects, builders, people who are unemployed. America's got a $30 million package they want to give to Jordan to develop the West Bank. First thing we do, we take the Palestinians, we give them the money, take away the refugee camps, improve their quality of life, give them human services, let them do it themselves. It'll provide employment for the people, for the architects, for the engineers, and so on and so forth, and it'll improve the houses and the living quarters that these people are living in. Secondly, hold free, unencumbered elections in the West Bank and in Gaza. Have them internationally guaranteed. 1.3 million of the world's 2 million Palestinians live in the West Bank and Gaza. Let these people elect their leaders.
What does that say to the Israelis, who the other part of the Israelis, who say, well, we can't let these people overrun us. We're being outnumbered in our own land.
Well, I think personally that annexation is a very dumb idea. I don't think that Israel should, but I'm saying let them have elections to get Palestinian representatives elected. Nobody could say that these are quislings, and they will replace the PLO as a viable partner with whom we can talk.
Well, that's a key point, because the way you describe it and others describe it, the PLO is keeping these Palestinian people down for their own purposes, for the PLO's own purposes. So how do you mollify that situation?
Well, the PLO has lost a lot of ground in the West Bank. It really has. Again, this is not one of the things that came across in any of the reportage on the situation. The PLO has not delivered a thing, okay? This Christmas, this Easter, the shops in Bethlehem, in East Jerusalem, were closed, locked, because every time a Jew gets stabbed, and then Kahana's people go on a rampage, and then people kill a Lara, and people cancel tourism. They don't want this, the people of the West Bank. They want prosperity. They want responsible leadership. Now, once upon a time, the PLO controlled all the money in the West Bank. All the money that came into the West Bank was PLO controlled. You want a school? Come see me. You want a sewage system? Come see me. So in 1976, when there were mayoral elections, all the mayors elected were PLO because they could deliver. Today, that's not the situation at all. The only people who can deliver are the Jordanians. The Jordanians have opened up a bank in the West Bank. The Jordanians have totally renewed their fleet of trucks, because when Spain and Portugal entered the common market, you couldn't get rid of West Bank and Gazan citrus in Europe anymore. The Jordanians have opened up the bridge. All the West Bank produce goes through there. The Jordanians are paying all the teachers now in the West Bank, and he who pays the teachers controls the curriculum. It's Jordan that's replaced the PLO, and this is the time to move.
But you would agree then that the PLO is not 1.3 million potential terrorists. It is a people.
Oh, of course.
With some terrorists among them, as any group has terrorists among them.
Absolutely. This is the greatest tragedy. People think I live in Israel and that I live in Jerusalem. I'm a journalist. My friends, and I'm not saying it friends, I'm saying my friends are Palestinian journalists, Palestinian thinkers. We sit and have this discussion many a Friday night. We are deeply involved with each other intellectually. How do we get out of this imbroglio? And instead of dealing with the depth of the issue, the press here deals with the hype of the issue.
Why does it always seem to be that the press is the whipping boy in all of this? And you as a reporter...
Because they deserve to be in many instances.
But at the same time, isn't the press a messenger? Isn't the press... I mean, they're filled with... There are bad reporters, there are bad parliamentarians, there are bad prime ministers. There are also good reporters, presumably like you, who are attacking your brethren.
I deal with issues. Now, I find that a lot of the press here has a mindset. The Washington Post has never, ever published a positive story on Israel. Never.
That's a pretty broad statement.
No, you can go through the archives. You bring me one. Glenn Frankel, the Washington Post reporter there, is an honest reporter who does a good job. But you read the editorials. You read at the editorial page of the Washington Post. For them, Pollard was like manna from heaven. They loved it. They couldn't write enough about it.
Well, it was a good scandal.
Yeah, it was a good scandal. So was Walker, and so was 1,000 other things that were happening at the time.
aren't we being oversensitive then? I mean,
Yeah, we are, because I'm sick and tired of walking around just saying I'm sorry. And I'm sick and tired of being in America and saying I apologize. I mean, I'll ask you a question. We get $1.8 billion a year in military aid. Big issue every year. Why should we give you guys? The American taxpayer is paying $30 to $40 billion a year for the defense of Western Europe, for countries that spend less than 4% of their own GNP on their own defense. The American taxpayer is paying for 30,000 American troops to be permanently positioned in South Korea. The American taxpayer has assumed the entire defense burden of Japan that spends less than 1% of its GNP on its own defense.
so what's everybody getting turned around?
Why are they coming and speaking to me about 1.8 billion, less than the price of an aircraft carrier, when out there in that sea of madness, and we can see what's going on in the Middle East, you've got a stable, pro-Western democracy. 20% of the Israeli Air Force can totally sink the Soviet Navy in the Eastern Mediterranean in 4 days. You've got a big question mark over the future participation of Greece and Turkey in NATO. 1.8 billion a year is a totally rational thing.
But isn't it also true that Israel has passed a stage from being a media darling, the David from 1948 on?
Absolutely.
Now, Israel is being given the microscope just as anybody else. Say, if you would run for office or if I would run for office, we'd get the same thing.
Exactly, and I'm very happy about it in a way. You know, Golda Meir once said, rather a bad press than a good epitaph. That's exactly the way I feel about it. There are things we have to do. How many countries, Mark, how many countries in the middle of a war would have a commission of inquiry like we had into Sabra and Shatila, fire defense minister, fire chief of staff, fire head of military intelligence? How many countries in the middle of a war against terror would totally kick out the top echelon of its own secret service with this that we just did? You people are having your Iran-Contra hearings. Ollie North appears today, the other day, and he says, this is going to damage the country's security. Lehman, the prosecuting counsel, has been getting piles of letters. One of them said, why don't you move to Moscow? And by the way, a lot of the letters were anti-Semitic against Lehman. So this doesn't faze me at all. I'm comfortable about Israel's inner strength. The courts, the state controller, the institutions of democracy are too strong for any one government to be. We had Sharon as defense minister. You know what a nightmare that was? And taking us into Lebanon against the desired policies of the government, he paid the price. He was thrown out of office.
The reputation of the Israeli Defense Forces, the IDF, has also been somewhat under scrutiny now, as opposed to the Entebbe idea of the miracle workers. They are now looked upon, especially in the West Bank situation, as tyrannical, unjust, brutal. As you're a military reporter, what's going on here?
I think it happens, you know. I was in the paratroops. Say my 18-year-old kid, my kid's 17, he's going to the army next year. He's going to go join the paratroops or wherever he goes to in the army. He's joining to fight an enemy. What happens is that he lands up fighting schoolgirls throwing stones in the West Bank. Or stones are thrown and they've injured somebody, so you put down a curfew and you've got an Arab woman with a screaming child saying to you, I've got to get to the hospital, and she's speaking Arabic and you can't understand her. These are inhuman situations. And I agree with you, we've got to get out of it. But, the only reason there hasn't been a war with Syria, and Assad has many reasons to try and want to go to war against Israel, to stop the Iraq-Iran war, to take away attention from his own internal problems, to unite the Arabs against around him, to try and undermine the Camp David process. A lot of strategic reasons to go to war against Israel. But he takes the Israeli army very, very seriously. Very seriously. People say to me here, my God, you're becoming a theocratic country. I, as a Reformed Jew in America, couldn't go live there. Well, of course not. Is there any aliyah from America? How many Reformed Jews are coming there? The only aliyah to Israel is Orthodox Jews, and often non-Zionist Orthodox Jews. 16% of the Jewish population of Jerusalem are non-Zionist Jews who won't let me build a stadium, who burn down my bus shelters. Do you think I like the situation? I don't need people here to tell me about we've got to deal with our problems. But you can't take the sit-back, relaxed position here like many Jews do and say, you know, Israel, you know, it's something that it's not what I thought it would be. On the other hand, you can turn around and say a country of 4 million people that's had nothing but warfare since 1948. with the highest per capita educated workforce in the world, with more symphony per capita than any other country in the world, that produces and publishes more books per capita than any other country in the world. I didn't read that in the Washington Post.
Because it's like saying who didn't die today.
Well, I think it's about time we should say who's living and how they're living and how they're doing. I don't think we should only deal with death and destruction. I think we should give people hope as well, and a sense of achievement and a sense of pride. And I think it's very counterproductive in any country. For the press, we newsmen, we don't take free trips. We don't go and live in the best hotels. I covered the war in Cambodia. I lived real well compared to most of the people around me. Expense account, right? I fly business class all over. Are we uncorrupt? Are we totally incorrigible? Are we spotless? We're not.
Well, what's the alternative, though? I mean,
The alternative is to have a press that's also critical of itself.
which we have.
Yeah.
You accuse the Washington Post of being anti-Semitic.
No,
Other
not
people-
anti-Semitic. God forbid, I never
I'm sorry,
said that.
anti-Israel.
I said they've never
And-
published a pro-Israel piece as long as I've known that.
And
Never.
you hear people accuse the Washington Post of being Israel's mouthpiece.
The
Or
Washington
the,
Post?
or the New York Times, or the LA Times.
I think the New York Times is a wonderful newspaper. I think it's about the closest I've ever seen to the perfect newspaper in many respects, because the editorial writers and the reporters are not allowed to mix. One set writes opinion, the other set writes reportage.
Mhm.
A reporter reports the situation as he sees it, as best as he can, relying on resources. I, in my newspaper, am a bit of both. I go out, I cover war, come back, I write opinions. No? And I don't think that that's a very healthy situation, and I see a lot of it here. I mean, you got an anchor man. He basically went off to Israel and did a 1-hour editorial, not a report.
Isn't it true, though, that Israel, it's almost a mark of maturity to be able to examine Israel with its faults rather than simply as the miracle that it is?
I've lived there for 22 years. One of the things I can't stand about the country is that all of us have got nothing good to say about it. We sit there on a Friday night at our house and we moan and we groan, and this one's corrupt and that one. We are very self-critical people. I suppose, and another thing that's amazing, there's 16 political parties in the country, right? There are 16 daily newspapers in a country of 4 million people. There is news on the hour on every one of our radio stations, and 90% of the country will watch the evening news and television on our only one channel, and we have 6 hours of news analysis a day on radio. Can you believe it? 6 hours of news analysis a day. Everybody's criticized. Nobody can do anything right. Everybody can do only stuff wrong. So I've never looked at Israel as a miracle. I think it's a miracle that we're still there despite this tendency towards self-destruction. The other thing is this. Israel's a country that's absorbed 3 times its own number in immigrants. 54% of the population of Israel come from countries with no democratic backgrounds at all. Morocco, Libya, Tunisia, the Arab world. When we say the High Court rules, they think you're crazy. They don't know what you're speaking about when you say, let's take the Secret Service and have a commission of inquiry. They've got that we've survived as a strong democracy despite this. And despite the fact that, listen, to be quite honest, all the rich Moroccan Jews went to France, all the poor came to Israel. All the rich Egyptian Jews went to Argentine, all the poor came to Israel. All the rich South Africans are coming here and all the poor are coming to Israel. I mean, it's amazing that the country is as democratic and as stable and as pro-Western as it is, despite all these trends.
You've also written that while Israel may be under unprecedented criticism around the world, its strengths have never been stronger.
That's true.
We talk about alliances that are being reestablished, ties with Africa, more movement in discussions with the Soviet Union. The peace talks, as you say, may be dead and buried, but there are still rumblings, whatever. As we sum up, in some type of conclusion, with all the moaning that's going on, are you optimistic as far, since there is no war around the corner, although there may well be one around the block, there's been peace now as we talk since Lebanon, which is 5 years. What are your thoughts for the future?
Well, I feel very good about the future. I think peace with Egypt, people tell me it's a tenuous peace, cold peace, hot peace. The fact of the matter is it survived the assassination of Sadat. It survived a 3-year war in Lebanon. It survived Israel's decision to bomb the Iraqi nuclear reactor. It survived Israel's decision to bomb the PLO in Tunisia. Jordan, the relations are really good between us and Jordan. The bridges are open, as I explained, and so on and so forth. Lebanon is a tactical problem. Syria, all the time that we're at peace with Egypt and at peace with Jordan, I can't see Syria taking us on a one-to-one. Our relations with China seem to be going through a transformation. Our relations with the Soviet Union are going through a transformation. Japan, that would never speak to Israel, is suddenly doing business with Israel, become a major purchaser of our diamonds. Our high-tech industries are first class and they're good. Israel has obviously become the force that people say now exists. It's there. We have to live with it. And if you ask me what the big difference is, you know, convoluted thoughts about an international conference and the PLO in Algeria and this, the message has changed. 20 years ago, it was, how are we going to push the Jews into the sea? The message today is, we may not like them, but how are we going to live with them? And that's a major achievement. And I don't want to get wax biblical, but I just say, Moses walked around the desert for 40 years. Not because he couldn't find the promised land, because there's certain things that you have to do to earn statehood. You tested war, fire, the whole bit. And I think we've passed that test, and today we're a nation on its own 2 feet with a positive balance in the bank, with an Israeli political system that is maturing not from Pinsk and Minsk and Vilna, but grown up in the country, where Ashkenazim Sfaradim are no longer a problem, where we got 2 deputy prime ministers who are Sfaradim, and our chief of staff was born in Iraq in one generation.
We're outnumbering the Ashkenazim.
Got their rightful place in our society. When I was at university in 1969, I think 13% of the student body was Sfaradi. Today it's 55%, exactly what it should be. All these things have happened, and we've matured into a country with its own indigenous political system, its own army, its financial systems, and its industry. And I feel very good about it. The question is whether we'll be wise enough to take the strength that we're enjoying now and translate it into a meaningful relationship with the Palestinians, where we can live side by side as productive neighbors and not as
antagonists.
And worse than that, as enemies.
And on that note, Hirsh Goodman, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts and opinions, and some pretty strong ones with us. We hope this has inspired some thoughts in all of us. Our guest has been Hirsh Goodman, correspondent for the Jerusalem Post. I'm Mike Leiderman. We'll see you next time.